Thank you, Bill. It's great to be here with so many good friends and folks who've I've known a long time and also have been to a lot of these events through thick and thin. It's always fun to come here and give an update on how things are going. Let me make sure. Does everyone have? We have handouts. People want to talk about budget. I thought I better bring some charts and graphs and numbers for everybody. I'm going to not walk through it all, but I just thought it would be interesting for people to look at. So I'm going to talk for a little bit about our budget and what we've been doing really for a couple years, then talk about perhaps people we're interested in the last couple of weeks, and then I'd just love to open it up to questions and comments and have a conversation. I think we got almost a whole hour, and I look forward to hearing from folks here. A lot of you here, as we all know, are very involved and very thoughtful on civic issues, so I'd love to hear your thoughts. Let me just start by saying, you read the headlines every day, city, county, state, federal. Now the federal government doesn't have to officially have a balanced budget, so in some ways they got it easier than the rest of us. The last couple of years have just been, a time that anyone in office will look back on and say, weren't 08, 09, and 2010 just horrible? We've all gotten hit with this economy, and the impact on our budgets has been devastating. And frankly, not a lot of good options of how you deal with it. You'll see on this sheet, I'll go to mainly point you to page 2. That is a summary of the major categories of revenue the county gets. Now every government has a different combination and mix of revenue streams. In Hamilton County, it's, as you'll see, sales tax, property tax, local government fund, which comes through the state, interest earnings, and then a number of revenue sources from the buying and selling of property or development activity. And this really sums up, and in a way it doesn't quite capture it as well, but when you look on that left-hand column, each of those lines is $10 million. And so when you look at what's happened in our revenue streams from this economy, it's pretty devastating. And they're different. You'll look at the different governments out there, and you'll see some were hit harder earlier and some were hit harder later. The Hamilton County, we rely so much on the sales. Think about the recession that we've experienced. What was the first thing to go? The housing market. The housing market started struggling a couple years ago, and home sales fell off. People buying homes, people purchasing the items that allow them to rehab homes, that all fell off. What was the next thing to go? Late last year, the Wall Street collapsed. All the media attention around the Lehman Brothers collapse and everything else, in almost a week or two, absolutely devastated consumer confidence. And that's when people stopped buying late last fall, all through this year. Those are the 1-2 punch of that recession, and then that affected, whether it be car sales or you name it, that affected, that was really the home crisis, housing crisis, followed by a lot of the Wall Street chaos, followed by consumer confidence going straight down. And now what are we seeing? The unemployment coming later. So if you listen to that sequence, you'll see why different governments are struggling at different times. If you look at our revenue streams, they are reliant on a couple key factors I just mentioned. One is real estate transactions. When the home housing market started collapsing, we start feeling that almost right away. The other thing that's hidden in a housing crisis, as I mentioned, is the number 2 item in our sales tax, and this is true generally. The number 2 item where we get sales tax from is the purchase of cars. The number 1 item are all the purchases that happen around homes. So when that housing crisis hits, it kills the real estate transaction fees, the transfer tax on every real estate sale, and it also really hits your sales tax because people are not buying the items that they use to rehab or upgrade or renovate their homes or to furnish their homes. So you'll see that initial housing crisis, followed by the consumer confidence crisis, couldn't have been a bigger double whammy on a county that relies on property sales and sales tax. So we felt very early on the effects of this and saw it a year and a half ago. Our sales tax immediately started to plummet, which was following on our property transfer tax plummeting. Contrast that to the city. They relied much more on the earnings tax. So when sales went down, if you look back, the county's budget crisis was maybe a year and a half or 2 years ago. It started to get a lot of attention. The cities has been more in the last 6 months. Why is that? They are on earnings tax. They can deal with the sales tax problem. They can deal with even the housing crisis to some degree. But when people start getting unemployed or furloughed or salary reduction, that's when their revenue stream starts to get hit. So if you look back at where everyone gets their revenues, you'll see that's why the county was really the first in the line. We're at the front end our revenues are at the front end of an economic recession. The cities are at the tail end. That's why we've had a lot more, for 2 years of this. Theirs is more recent, but theirs will probably last longer than ours will, because as consumer confidence goes back up, we'll see the upside sooner than they will. You'll also see we do get, and this is an unspoken of, but the number one hit to the, percentage-wise to our revenue streams is interest earnings. Look at that fifth category. We just a couple years ago would get $20 million a year from that. Now it's under 10 because interest rates are so low, and our treasurer collects interest as money sits in the county's accounts. And with those interest rates going so down, it's just plummeted. So we're also kind of a captive of those interest rates. That is really, so in many ways, an economic crisis driven by a housing crunch and driven by a drop in consumer confidence couldn't be a more perfect storm. And then coupled with a great decrease in interest rates, couldn't be a more perfect storm when it comes to the Hamilton County or a lot of counties' budgets. And what have we had to do? We've simply had to adjust. There really isn't or wasn't too much choice about what we could do, except to frankly reduce what we spent. And this is when you look on page 3. Page 3 and page 4 really walk you through what the county, and this is something that just isn't very well known, what the county spends money on. The county spends money, we often hear, well, you have a budget crisis, but don't cut public safety. I mean, we agree with that. But when you add up the courts and the public safety budget, public safety being sheriff, prosecutor, other aspects to it, and the courts, it's 70% of our budget. Most of what the county does is public safety. Most of what the county does is run the courthouse, run the prosecutor's office, support the jail, support the sheriff's operation. And a whole lot of that spending is mandated by statute. And a whole lot of that spending, frankly, because of separation of powers, the county commissioners can't really control. We can set a number. And as a matter of fact, if that number is too low, the courts can actually sue us in their courthouse and therefore win that suit, saying they need a greater amount of money because they are allowed to get what is reasonable to do what they need to do. So what we have here is 70% of that budget. When you see all those declining revenues, 70% of that budget goes to public safety and courts, and that's mandated. Now, then people would say, well, what's general government? That sounds like a place where there's probably all sorts of things to take. Well, that's all the other elected offices that you hear about.